The Valley of Valleys. The wolf spoke. What does it mean to be the meeting of the raven and the swan? Fiacre replied, It means to understand the marriage of sea and the sky. The raven watches the way to the swan. It is to understand the river. It is to understand how the river lives through the land. The wolf spoke. Tell me. Fiacre replied, I spoke with a woman. She was one of three. She was talking about dialect, language, the diversity of sound allowed by a single language. She spoke of how in valley after valley the dialects were different but also connected, locally and regionally. They were ecosystems of language particular to the landscape, to the history of the family, to the experience of the ancestors that settled to populate and manage the space within their borders. For 1,000 years those borders remained intact. The people spread across their fens and moorlands, and tucked between their mountains and their hills. Like plants they spread and set root. Incursions would take place here and there through time, but the land and the sky ruled, and the old ways remained in coves of river and range. The language followed the lay of the land, the pattern of the weather. The language mimicked the experience. Some rolled sound to reflect the hills they knew. Others spoke with a sound as flat as the land, while others were as stern as the sea. Some spoke of hearth fire, and some were cold and hard, firm, pointed, and efficient. The dialects reflected their speakers, the souls of speakers, the manners of speakers. Each person within each family was a different branch of the same tree. Each family in each valley was a different branch of a larger tree. Each community of valleys was yet another branch of a still larger tree. Speech within speech within speech, right back to the deepest roots. Isolation fed the roots, the isolation of deep communities, those that were never cut down, the farmers, those with the numbers to replenish the fields, those that would remain when the old lord's last ring-bearer had died. They were the farmers, those that swept land and sea for food, those that did not go far to market, but remained close and never once saw the city. For them there was no need to impress. There was no one who had not known all others since birth. So the language was true, and outsiders were distrusted. By this the family lived, and the valley was tilled, and the language grew with characteristics of its own. Within the Valley of Valleys, at high summer, the young women of each family joined another family in another valley within the Valley of Valleys. And thereby, as husbanded soil taking the seed, each spring of the new would arrive as shoots, the offspring to replenish the land and keep the life therein. By that sharing of the seed, by that sharing of the soil, the Valley of Valleys became what it was, and after 2,000 years it was its own family, its own tree of 2,000 branches, each with spreading leaves, each to nurture a seed. None knew less in their lives than forefathers and foremothers, and the young would grow at their feet. By those 8 cardinal points the young would learn. They would learn the ages of their lives, how the winter would come, and how the elders would die beside their warming fires, and how a new generation would take to the hearth, and from there tell the stories of their time, of their father's time, unchanged in cause since the beginning. The stories and the language were one. The story was told in the body and in the voice of the elder's mind. The spirit would be seen in the reflection of fire in their eyes. Smoke would swirl, and the children's gaze would lift. And by that the children dreamed. They dreamed of their valley and its birds. They dreamed of the bleating sheep. They dreamed of the carving brook that wound its way between banks of windswept trees that sought movement, gnarled trees that bordered the water's flow, and lilting trees that cast shades with the sun. They dreamed of the snow that would come, and of the thaw. They dreamed of the first flowers low on the south-facing slopes. They dreamed of voices they had known. They dreamed of the walls and windows and doors. They dreamed of floors, roofs, and ceilings. They dreamed of the hearth fire. They dreamed of food. They dreamed of brothers, sisters, and cousins. They dreamed of the men and of the women they knew. They knew others in the Valley of Valleys by their voice, if not by their look, and thereby they knew security, for those were those with whom they shared. They were those known to all. They were those who could not pretend. The voice said what needed to be said, and all else was shunned to the extent unknown. By that the valleys kept themselves. By that the traditions grew. By that the people knew. In the deepest valley, the highest valley, the language was all its own. It whistled with the howling wind. It dreamed of the whitest snow, crystal still pools, and the cloud around peaks. And the voices were cold outside and warm inside. The voices told of wolves. The valley was home to a pack, fathered by the grey of stone. The valley of valleys was home to as many families as men as there were species of tree. But just as each tree differed, so too did every man. Each family knew and honoured its lord, the wisdom of the elders, by providing them with the children to raise, by tasking them with tending the shoots. By that each family lived, one as the oak, one as the ash, one as the willow, and so on. And each house above its door had etched its symbol, each a different tree, each a different valley, each a different voice, one language, the language of the valley of valleys, each valley its own tongue. All over the country this was the way, valleys of valleys, and each a different tongue, each a different body, each a different way, yet connected through water and through wind. That was the way of the old world. That was as it was until the war came, until the stories were lost, and everyone forgot they ever existed, until the river died.